You are currently positioned at the absolute precipice of a monumental shift. I do not mean this in a poetic sense. This is not some figurative language designed to evoke a warm, fuzzy feeling about your personal growth, nor is it a metaphorical pat on the back for your spiritual journey. I am speaking in literal, objective terms. At this exact second, the very moment you stumbled upon this specific broadcast and engaged with it, the structural foundation of your immediate reality achieved a state of critical synchronization. A dimensional aperture, a gateway, has swung wide open. You are operating on a strict 60-minute countdown. Do not misunderstand me. This is not a ticking clock leading to a disaster. This is not an impending deadline wrapped in anxiety. Nor is it a countdown to some cosmic punishment. This 1 hour must be understood through the lens of quantum physics. It is a fleeting window of profound coherence. We are talking about a state of maximum vibrational alignment where the energetic cost of leaping from your current paradigm into a completely new reality is reduced to absolute zero. For exactly 1 hour, this portal is completely and irreversibly unobstructed. Transcending your current state right now requires virtually zero friction, especially when compared to the immense struggle it will require if you attempt to force this transition later, or the tragic cost of never making the leap at all. You have 60 minutes. Consider the sheer improbability of your presence here, the reality that you discovered this message, that a deep-seated instinct compelled you to pause and listen rather than mindlessly scrolling away. None of this is a product of random chance. This is the aperture itself locking onto your specific frequency. It is the quantum footprint of whatever awaits you on the other side, sending out a homing beacon to the core of your being that intuitively recognizes its true home. Before we proceed any further, it is imperative that you internalize this truth. Absorb this not with the analytical, ego-driven part of your brain that seeks to be entertained, evaluated, or flattered, but with the profound, silent knowing deep within you. You have been selected for this exact passage. Let me be clear. I am not using the word selected as some cheap marketing ploy or a superficial compliment to stroke your ego. It is not a hook to demand something from you. I am utilizing it in its most precise, quantum mechanical definition. You have been isolated by the fundamental mechanics of the universe because your present frequency, your current level of conscious awareness, and the exact coordinates of your personal evolution have perfectly aligned with the stringent atmospheric conditions required to traverse this gateway right now. You did not earn this through some arbitrary system of moral scoring or good behavior. You simply navigated your existence until you hit the precise resonant frequency that caused this portal to manifest in your field of vision. And now, it is undeniably visible to you, and the clock is ticking on your hour. Here is the blueprint for what will transpire over the course of these next 60 minutes. We are going to approach this threshold side by side. We will dissect its nature, examine its composition, and demystify the quantum physics that govern a transition of this magnitude. We will cast an unblinking crystalline gaze upon both realms, the fading reality where your feet are currently planted, and the expansive existence waiting just beyond the barrier. You will comprehend exactly why this aperture materialized at this precise juncture in time, and why you, specifically, are the one standing before it. And then, we make the leap. This will not be a passive meditation or acute visualization technique that you easily dismiss tomorrow. We are going physically and energetically crossover. By the time the final seconds of this broadcast conclude, you will have firmly planted yourself in a new dimension of being. The iteration of you that first clicked play on this video will become nothing more than a residual memory. One variation of your consciousness enters this experience. A completely upgraded variation walks out. That is the true function of the gateway. That is the process unfolding right now, and the gears are already in motion. Let us address the physical and emotional turbulence you have been experiencing lately. Because gateways of this magnitude do not merely pop into existence without sending ripples backward through time. They always broadcast their arrival. The disruptions you have noticed in your daily routine are actually the gateway destabilizing your environment to make room for its manifestation. You have been feeling these tremors. You cannot deny the bizarre, disorienting atmosphere that has draped over your life for the past few weeks, or perhaps even months. It is a persistent sensation of existing in a state of limbo caught between the skin you are actively shedding and a new identity you cannot yet clearly visualize. You have likely noticed that the old narratives and justifications that used to govern your life feel hollow now, much like attempting to squeeze into a garment tailored for a drastically different body. The ambitions and attachments that once consumed your daily thoughts have been quietly bleeding out their significance. They are fading relentlessly, like water silently escaping from a cracked reservoir you didn't even realize was broken. Conversely, concepts and desires that previously held zero real estate in your mind have begun materializing at the periphery of your consciousness. They do not scream for your attention. They simply hover there, vibrating with quiet anticipation. You have been struck by sudden, intense flashes of absolute lucidity, only to watch them evaporate before you could articulate them. In those split seconds, you nearly grasp something colossal, a revelation about your own nature, the fabric of the cosmos, or your ultimate purpose on this planet. Yet, just as quickly, the mundane illusion of everyday reality snapped back into place, leaving you holding nothing but the ghostly residue of an almost epiphany. This has left you burdened with a profound restlessness that no amount of leisure time can alleviate. You are plagued by an exhaustion that even the deepest sleep cannot remedy. Listen to me. There is absolutely nothing fundamentally wrong or broken within you. This friction is happening because you are hovering at the very edge of a paradigm shift, and the massive gravitational pull of your future reality is already bleeding through the barrier. The gateway does not care if you feel ready or prepared. It unlocks the millisecond the atmospheric variables align. Once it does, the staggering energetic differential, the massive gap in potential between your current timeline and your destined trajectory, starts violently tugging at your spirit, completely independent of your conscious permission. That magnetic drag is exactly what has been weighing on you. That deep-seated agitation, that feeling of being suspended in the void, that undeniable premonition of a colossal arrival, all of that is the gateway, and it has been waiting, wide open, for the exact amount of time it took for you to finally uncover this transmission. This signifies that your window of absolute peak synchronization has arrived. We are looking at the exact interval where the energetic toll of leaping forward is reduced to its absolute minimum. The threshold of resistance has plummeted. That critical time frame is happening right now. It is unfolding within this very hour. Understand that I am not weaving a poetic allegory here. I am describing the literal physics of your reality. Allow me to unpack the mechanics behind this assertion. The quantum framework governing your current evolution is completely tangible, and comprehending this science is the very key that unlocks your ability to cross. The moment you grasp the underlying machinery, your subconscious resistance dissolves. Once that internal friction vanishes, the gateway expands to its maximum capacity. And when that aperture is fully dilated, you simply walk through it. The sequence is mathematically precise. The physics of transformation. Within the realm of quantum mechanics, fundamental particles do not occupy fixed, rigid locations. Instead, they exist in states fluid probability distributions that dictate where and what they could potentially manifest as. When a particle is in a state of superposition, it isn't merely occupying two distinct physical spaces simultaneously, as pop culture often misinterprets. Rather, it hums in a state of unadulterated potential. It is a vibrating wave of endless possibilities that is not yet solidified into one concrete timeline. Quite literally, the particle is caught in the space between. It hovers in the transitional void, separating its past iteration from its future manifestation. Then, a catalyst occurs, an act of observation, a collision, a precise measurement. Some external force interacts with that particle's wave function. Through that direct engagement, the superposition fractures and collapses, The hazy cloud of probability instantly condenses into a solitary, undeniable point of reality. The ambiguous in-between crystallizes into a highly specific state of being. Unbound potential violently transforms into actualized matter. In physics, this phenomenon is known as wave function collapse, and it serves as the foundational building block of existence. Every single thing in the known universe that possesses a definite form, every solitary atom, every complex molecule, every towering structure, and every breathing life form achieved its definition through this exact mechanism. They all crossed the boundary from infinite potentiality into tangible reality. Here is the crucial nuance that most individuals entirely miss regarding this transformation. The collapse of the wave function is never a random occurrence. It may appear chaotic and unpredictable to an outside observer, someone who is entirely blind to the particle's intricate background before the measurement took place. However, the resulting manifestation is strictly dictated by the wave function itself. It is governed by the exact architecture of its probability distribution. And what carves out the shape of that potential? The cumulative history of the particle, every microscopic interaction it has endured, every previous state it has occupied, and every environmental factor it has ever encountered heavily weighs the dice. To put it simply, the collapse is not a game of chance. It is a profound act of resonance. The entity snaps into the exact reality that perfectly echoes its accumulated historical data. It finalizes into the form that its entire cosmic trajectory has been relentlessly steering toward. Your personal superposition. This is the exact phenomenon occurring within your own consciousness at this very second. You have been existing in a psychological and energetic superposition. I do not mean this superficially. I mean it on a profound, structural level. You have been harboring the probability distributions of dozens of alternate versions of yourself. You have been simultaneously carrying multiple divergent timelines and fiercely different life trajectories within your mind and spirit. Think about the sheer volume of data you have accumulated, every single triumph and trauma you have endured, every doorway you bravely stepped through or fearfully backed away from, every phase of immense personal expansion, and every period of painful contraction, every active decision you finalized, and every choice you deliberately dodged, has been sculpting the architecture of your probability wave. All of these factors have been quietly calculating which specific version of you will ultimately materialize. And now, the environmental variables have reached a state of critical mass. The conditions for your personal wave function collapse are fully aligned. Your era of superposition is drawing to a close. This culmination is not happening merely because your ego decided it was time, nor because you meticulously penciled this transition into your calendar. It is occurring because the staggering, accumulated density of your personal history, the undeniable shape of your energetic wave function has finally hit the exact resonant frequency required to breach a new paradigm. The gateway, which serves as the ultimate bridge between abstract potential and solidified reality, is now actively granting access. It is the razor-thin line separating the fragmented in-between you from the fully actualized, arrived version of yourself. The portal is wide open. If you can viscerally feel yourself suspended in that haunting state of superposition, caught awkwardly between the ghost of who you used to be and the magnificent entity you are evolving into, you are likely broadcasting one frequency while physically trapped in the reality of another. If this resonates deeply, there is a blueprint specifically engineered for your current predicament. The sealed timeline is a comprehensive manual that meticulously charts this exact threshold crossing. It operates with the surgical precision of a quantum phase transition, guiding you out of the exhaustive negotiator pattern that has been relentlessly siphoning your energy directly into a state of absolute, sealed coherence. You will find the access link provided in the description below. The ephemeral nature of the gate. Let me reiterate. Your alignment window lasts for exactly 1 hour before the synchronization destabilizes. Do not perceive this as an aggressive threat. Receive it as an objective breakdown of how the mechanics of our reality function. Quantum gateways, those rare, exquisite moments of flawless alignment between human consciousness and an elevated state of being are strictly temporary. They are ephemeral windows. They dilate when the environmental variables harmonize, and they forcefully snap shut the moment those variables shift. The energetic expenditure required to force your way through after the window has closed is exponentially, devastatingly higher than the effortless glide of crossing while the portal is open. To visualize this dynamic, imagine attempting a daring leap between two rapidly moving platforms suspended high in the air. When those two surfaces achieve perfect synchronization when they match altitude, lock into the exact same velocity, and glide directly parallel to one another, stepping across the divide requires virtually zero exertion. It is as simple as taking a breath. When perfect synchronization occurs, crossing over requires nothing more than a gentle stride. It is a fleeting moment of choice, and instantly, you are on the other side. However, if you succumb to hesitation, if you begin to backtrack, if you convince yourself that you just need a little bit more time to prepare, the machinery of reality does not pause for you. The platforms continue their relentless motion. They drift apart. The chasm between them aggressively expands. Their elevations become hopelessly mismatched. And suddenly, the exact same transition that would have demanded zero effort now exacts a devastating toll. It morphs into an ordeal requiring a desperate, running sprint, a terrifying leap of faith, and the very real visceral peril of plummeting into the void. Right now, at this exact second, the gateway is perfectly flush. The platforms are locked side by side. The transition is practically effortless, but your 60-minute countdown remains absolute. So, before we make the leap, let us examine the landscape you are preparing to abandon. Let us plant our feet firmly on this side of the threshold and cast a brutally honest, panoramic gaze at the territory you have been inhabiting. We are not doing this to condemn your past, nor to grieve it, nor to frame your previous choices as failures. We do this to observe your history with surgical precision, because absolute clarity is the only tool that allows you to sever the energetic cord completely. You cannot genuinely transcend an environment you have not fully scrutinized. You cannot graduate from a paradigm you have not entirely acknowledged. The portal demands your total, unflinching presence in the before it will ever grant you safe passage to the after. The realm you have been occupying can best be described as a prolonged state of managed uncertainty. It is an existence where, humming quietly beneath the static of your daily routines, you have harbored a profound, unshakable knowing that you are designed for something vastly larger than the life you are currently tolerating. Yet, you lack the blueprint to merge that intuitive certainty with the tangible, measurable world resting right in front of you. Consequently, you adapted to manage the chasm. You learned to navigate the agonizing tension between your dormant potential and your actual, outward expression. You engineered sophisticated coping mechanisms to tolerate the vast distance between who you intuitively know you are and what mundane society reflects back to you. In doing so, you cultivated a highly specific trait. You became immensely careful. Careful is the precise terminology for the gravity on this side of the portal. Do not confuse this with cowardice. They are fundamentally distinct. A coward outright refuses to acknowledge the gateway's existence. A careful individual, however, clearly sees the threshold and creeps toward it with extreme caution. They calculate every millimeter of their approach, tapping every stone, verifying the structural integrity of the earth before committing their full body weight to the next step. This caution is not a character flaw. In many instances, it is profound wisdom. Yet, carefulness harbors a dark, insidious shadow side. Left unchecked, this cautiousness morphs into a terminal condition. It degrades into a chronic loop of endlessly approaching but never actually traversing. It becomes the exhaustive habit of constantly preparing to be prepared, without ever declaring yourself genuinely ready. It is the tragedy of setting up a permanent camp exactly on the borderline, forever refusing to take the final, defining step. This purgatory of endless preparation is precisely where the majority of chosen ones find themselves trapped. And I need you to absorb that specific phrase, chosen ones, and sit with the visceral wave of cringe or discomfort it likely triggers within your ego right now. That internal resistance is highly valid. It is palpable. and it is a crucial component of what we must dismantle before you cross. The Chosen One archetype is perhaps one of the most violently misunderstood phenomena within human consciousness. Society has aggressively romanticized it, dressing it up in mythological tropes of heroic exceptionalism, cinematic destiny, and inflated self-importance. Because of this persistent cultural distortion, the individuals who are genuinely and actively living this pattern categorically refuse to identify with it. They falsely equate the term with sheer arrogance, narcissism, and the obnoxious demand to be recognized as special. Desperate to avoid becoming that caricature, they blind themselves to their own fundamental nature. But possessing the Chosen One signature has absolutely zero correlation with ego or grandiosity. It is strictly a mechanical, structural relationship between a specific frequency of consciousness and the dimensional reality it currently inhabits. Allow me to map out this architecture with absolute precision, and as I do, I want you to silently verify if this mirrors your own internal compass. A Chosen One is simply an individual plagued by an inescapable, often uncomfortable intuition that they were deployed here for a highly specific function. This wasn't a career path they logically selected or mapped out on a vision board. It is an assignment that seemingly hunted them down and selected them. They feel a magnetic drag toward a unique type of contribution, a distinct level of awareness, and a specific vibration of presence that utterly defies conventional societal labels. It is a calling that the people orbiting their life simply cannot perceive with the same burning intensity, a discrepancy that has routinely left the Chosen One feeling profoundly isolated, even when surrounded by fiercely loyal, loving companions. The defining characteristic of this chosen archetype is a radically atypical sensitivity. I am not merely speaking of emotional fragility, though that is often a byproduct. I am referring to sensory and intuitive perception. It is the sheer ability to detect data that remains invisible to the masses. It is the capacity to decode hidden patterns, to sense the subterranean undercurrents, to spot the invisible mechanics operating behind the curtain, and to instantly translate the deeper meaning hiding behind a mundane event. This hyperperception is undeniably a phenomenal gift. However, it is simultaneously an excruciating burden because it forces the Chosen One to render reality at a staggeringly higher resolution than the general population. A higher resolution guarantees a more vibrant experience of beauty, but it equally guarantees a more devastating experience of pain, an overwhelming influx of complexity, and a depth of loneliness that ordinary minds could never begin to fathom. Consequently, the Chosen One carries a heavy historical record of being chronically misunderstood. This is not to say they have never been truly seen. Occasionally, rare individuals have crossed their path, people who could peer past the veil, who recognized their unique energy signature, and who answered their transmission with deep recognition instead of baffled confusion. But those kindred spirits are exceptionally scarce. Therefore, the Chosen One has spent agonizingly massive chapters of their timeline, feeling as though they were desperately trying to communicate in a dialect no one else was equipped to translate. They have operated like a radio tower broadcasting on an encrypted frequency that the surrounding world simply lacks the antenna to catch. Furthermore, the Chosen One has been subjected to relentless testing, not in some theatrical, cinematic showdown against a singular villain, but rather through the grueling, persistent friction of their own existence. The ongoing circumstances of their timeline have systematically cornered them into unlocking dormant capacities they had no idea they possessed. They have endured crushing losses that forcefully forged unbreakable resilience. They have waded through maddening confusion that ruthlessly hammered them into crystalline clarity. They have survived profound periods of isolation that ultimately weaponized them with absolute, unshakable self-sufficiency. The architecture of your preparation, the trials you have endured, rarely presented themselves as fair or balanced examinations. In the thick of the storm, they did not resemble spiritual assessments or cosmic curriculum. They manifested as sheer agony, brutal setbacks, and a universe that stubbornly refused to align with your deepest ambitions. Yet, looking back through the transparent lens of hindsight, the structural blueprint becomes undeniable. These relentless crucibles were systematically forging you into the exact vessel required to execute your ultimate purpose. And yet, despite surviving this profound refinement, despite the agonizing sensitivity, the chronic alienation, the grueling tests, and that haunting, nameless drive, the individual bearing the chosen archetype typically hesitates at the precipice. They linger indefinitely in that overly cautious paradigm. They discover brilliant methods to set up camp right next to the portal without ever actually breaching it. Does this reflection pierce your core? If you see your own reflection in this dynamic, I need you to absorb this next truth with absolute, crystalline clarity. Your failure to cross over until this moment is absolutely not a symptom of a character defect. It is not an indicator of weakness. It is not fundamentally about fear, even though fear has undoubtedly shadowed the process. The objective reality is that the aperture simply was not primed to fully dilate until this exact chronological second. The grueling curriculum of your preparation was still actively downloading. Your quantum probability wave was still being violently sculpted by the mandatory life experiences required to trigger a total collapse. But the preparation phase has officially concluded. The gateway is completely unsealed, and your 60-minute timer is running. A brief pause for alignment. If the frequency of this transmission is striking a genuine, undeniable chord within your spirit, take a fraction of a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. The architecture of this work is expanding rapidly, and you will absolutely want your coordinates locked in for the profound insights approaching next. The physics of the phase transition. Let us delve into the actual quantum mechanics governing this pattern, because this is the exact juncture where abstract spirituality crystallizes into hard, transformative science. In the discipline of physics, there is a strict thermodynamic concept known as a critical threshold. This is the exact mathematical tipping point where an enclosed system accumulates a specific capacity of energy, violently forcing it to mutate from one physical state into an entirely new one. Consider a pool of water brought to 99 degrees Celsius. It remains a liquid. It still perfectly obeys the physical limitations and behavioral laws of a fluid, but inject one singular, additional degree of thermal energy, and the entire structural paradigm shatters. The water transmutes into steam. The molecules that were previously vibrating rapidly, but tethered tightly together, suddenly possess the sheer energetic velocity to obliterate their chemical bonds and expand explosively as a gas. The elemental identity of the substance undergoes a violent, instantaneous revolution. This transformation does not occur through a slow, agonizing crawl. It happens all at once. The microsecond the threshold is breached. Science labels this a phase transition, and it is arguably the most vital concept you must grasp to understand what is physically happening to your consciousness right now. Reaching the boiling point. For years, you have been painstakingly accumulating these metaphorical degrees. Every brutal lesson, every devastating heartbreak, every fleeting moment of profound lucidity, and every suffocating era of confusion, each isolated event has been injecting raw kinetic energy into your spiritual system. For the longest time, you were idling at 95 degrees, then 97, then 98. The internal pressure was aggressively stockpiling, but the ultimate mutation remained out of reach, because that final threshold had not been struck. But recently, the atmospheric pressure shifted. That agonizing restlessness, that eerie sensation of lingering in the void, that visceral instinct that you were towing the edge of a cliff, that was your internal temperature aggressively dialing up to 99 degrees Celsius. At this exact second, you are hovering at the ultimate boiling point. You are resting at the precise temperature where one single unit of aligned energy will detonate the phase transition. This very broadcast serves as that final degree. The magic does not reside in the syllables I am speaking. The catalyst is the absolute synchronicity of you encountering this specific data at this exact microsecond. The flawless alignment of your energetic readiness colliding with this exact frequency. is the final spark. The phase transition is actively occurring right now. You are vaporizing into steam, the liquid iteration of your identity, the complacent version that allowed itself to be contained, the version that passively flowed around barriers and blindly molded itself to fit whatever restrictive vessel society poured it into, is being permanently eradicated. The gaseous, expansive manifestation of you is taking over. This new iteration defies containment, rapidly expands to command the atmosphere, and wields a terrifying amount of transformative power. That violent phase transition is exactly what this gateway represents. It is the definitive junction where the staggering weight of your lived experience violently ejects you from an outdated paradigm and hurls you into an entirely new state of conscious operation, gazing across the divide. Now, let us cast our gaze across the threshold. A successful crossing mandates a clear line of sight toward your ultimate destination. You cannot physically navigate toward a reality you are terrified to look at, nor can you step through a portal if you stubbornly refuse to acknowledge what waits on the other side. So, we must observe the after without flinching, entirely abandoning the protective armor of skepticism that once kept you safe but now only serves to anchor you in the past. Waiting for you on the other side of this aperture is an evolution of yourself that has permanently resigned from managing the excruciating gap between your infinite potential and your daily expression. This upgraded version has utterly amputated the toxic shadow side of being careful. This iteration has fiercely committed. They have stepped fully into the unique, unapologetic frequency of their life's purpose, completely abandoning the pathetic internal negotiations that once forced them to dilute their power for the comfort of ordinary life. Once you clear this gateway, your very method of communication fundamentally alters. You will not necessarily speak with grander eloquence or poetic flair. Instead, you will speak with a lethal, undeniable precision. Your communication becomes razor-sharp and unequivocally authentic. The exhausting chasm that once separated your internal truth from your external persona implodes entirely. The immense volume of psychological and spiritual energy you previously squandered on maintaining that artificial divide is suddenly liberated, flooding directly back into your energetic reserves. You achieve a state of pure, unadulterated presence, simply because your mind is no longer distracted by the exhausting, an invisible performance of pretending to be a diluted version of yourself. Once you breach this dimensional portal, the entire architecture of your interpersonal relationships fundamentally rewires itself. You will not necessarily acquire a larger, louder social circle. Rather, you will magnetically draw in the correct individuals. This phase transition permanently alters your baseline vibrational frequency. When your fundamental frequency elevates, your magnetic resonance shifts in perfect tandem. Consequently, the people who were tethered to your timeline strictly because they matched your old, suppressed, and cautious vibration will naturally begin to detach. This separation does not require dramatic conflict, explosive arguments, or bitter rejection. It is merely the objective physics of dissonant resonance taking out the trash. Simultaneously, the allies, mentors, and counterparts who naturally harmonize with your newly elevated frequency will suddenly materialize. Understand this. They have perpetually existed within your orbit, but they resided on the opposite side of the threshold, rendering them entirely invisible to your previous, limited vantage point. Beyond this gateway, your approach to your life's labor transforms radically. That distinct, undeniable contribution you have intuitively sensed for years, the monumental task you could never accurately define, fully commit to, or unapologetically claim suddenly snaps into breathtaking clarity. This does not happen because the heavens part to hand you a neatly typed divine mandate. It occurs because the phase transition violently strips away the static and interference patterns that were previously jamming your internal radar. When you finally cease burning your life force to manage the gap between your authentic soul and your acceptable worldly avatar, your internal signal becomes flawlessly unobstructed. The creative, professional, and spiritual output that flows from this uncorrupted signal is of an entirely different, vastly superior species than the compromised work generated from a managed, hesitant existence. Furthermore, your entire phenomenological experience of time undergoes a radical mutation. This is perhaps one of the most astonishing, paradigm-shattering side effects of a conscious phase transition, and paradoxically, it is the most difficult concept to articulate to someone still standing on the shore of the before. But I will attempt to translate it. On your current side of the aperture, time functions as an aggressive, external force that is continually happening to you. It feels like a relentless, sweeping river current dragging you along, sometimes washing you toward your desired destination, but often violently ripping you off course. Conversely, on the other side, time morphs into a spatial medium that you actively navigate. It ceases to be an external dictator and becomes a fluid landscape you move through. This distinction might appear microscopic on paper, but it completely rewrites the physics of your daily reality. When time acts upon you, you are perpetually lagging behind, eternally scrambling to close the agonizing distance between where you currently stand and where you feel you ought to be. When time becomes a navigable medium, you realize you are situated precisely at the correct coordinates. You are always, inevitably, exactly where you are mandated to be. That relentless, agonizingly persistent intuition of a higher calling, the one that refused to let you sleep in peace, ceases to be a fleeting broadcast you randomly pick up on a good day. It transmutes into the permanent atmosphere you breathe. It establishes itself as the dominant carrier wave of your entire existence, rather than an erratic, intermittent transmission. You no longer have to actively meditate or desperately try to tune in to your purpose. You seamlessly embody it. Operating from this elevated state, the tangible execution of your mission, the exact physical shape your unique contribution is meant to take, reveals itself with an obviousness that is utterly impossible to perceive from your former standpoint. This is the magnificent reality waiting for you across the divide. However, the integrity of this gateway demands absolute, brutal transparency. So, I must deliver a stark warning. The reality on the other side is absolutely not easier in the sense of demanding less exertion or granting you a permanent vacation. In reality, it extracts substantially more from you. Remember the physics we discussed. The steam iteration of your consciousness operates at a profoundly higher energetic velocity than the contained, liquid version. A mind that has undergone this phase transition exists in a state of maximum exposure, entirely stripped of the protective armor worn by a carefully managed ego. The moment you stop policing the boundary between who you are and what you show the world, you become devastatingly visible. You become fiercely legible to the universe, fully exposed and available for both the incredible opportunities that harmonize with your truth and the intense forces that will violently clash with it. Crossing this threshold does not magically teleport you into a sterile utopia devoid of friction. Instead, it transports you into an arena where the friction is authentic rather than synthetically manufactured. The obstacles become legitimate, evolutionary challenges, rather than the stagnant, suffocating challenge of perpetually hiding at the starting line. The risks you face become the visceral, blood-pumping risks of manifesting your raw identity in the physical world, rather than the hollow, cowardly risk of almost showing up. I am delivering this harsh truth because the portal demands an informed, conscious crossing. You are required to evaluate both territories with completely unclouded vision. You must weigh the before defined by the suffocating gap, the exhausting caution, and the chronic ache of unfulfilled arrival against the after, characterized by radical expression, legitimate friction, terrifying vulnerability, and the breathtaking reality of a life perfectly tuned to your exact resonance. Both existences are entirely real. Both exact a heavy toll. But here is the ultimate differential you must accept. The penalty for remaining anchored on your current side is violently extracted in the currency of unlived potential and quiet despair. The price of leaping is paid in the currency of profound, unfiltered engagement with raw reality. And I assure you, the cosmic exchange rate overwhelmingly favors the leap. This brings us to the most critical variable of this entire equation. Why this specific fraction of time? Why now? Why is this exact hour the unrepeatable crossing point? Why couldn't this have occurred last year, or last month, or perhaps half a year from now when you mistakenly believe you will finally feel ready? The answer to this lies deeply embedded within the quantum mechanics of chronometry and universal timing, and what I am about to explain is unequivocally one of the most vital revelations you will absorb during this entire transmission. Within the advanced framework of quantum mechanics, there exists a critical temporal metric known as coherence time. This is the precise, notoriously fleeting interval during which a quantum system successfully sustains its state of superposition. It is the peak window of boundless, untapped potential that exists just prior to the inevitable onset of decoherence, the exact moment when the infinite wave function brutally collapses, freezing into a single, solidified, and unchangeable reality. While suspended within this coherence time, the system enjoys absolute, unrivaled elasticity. It possesses the ultimate flexibility to solidify into an infinite number of drastically different destinies. However, once this sacred window expires, the system irrevocably decoheres. It becomes contaminated by the environmental pressures, gravitational pulls, and historical patterns surrounding it. These external forces hijack the process, predetermining exactly which rigid outcome the system will be forced to adopt. Your consciousness is governed by a coherence time, and you are currently suspended dead center inside of it. That agonizing agitation, that liminal sensation of drifting between worlds, that dizzying vertigo of standing right at the precipice, do not mistake these for psychological symptoms. They are the undeniable, energetic signatures of a mind operating at absolute peak coherence. You are a consciousness held in pure superposition, oscillating wildly between an expired past and an unwritten future. You have not yet decohered. The mundane, gravitational forces of ordinary existence have not yet managed to dictate your final form. This present hour is your window of supreme malleability. You currently possess the maximum degree of choice and the highest possible capacity to actively step through the portal into a timeline that perfectly mirrors your ultimate potential, rather than quietly surrendering to a timeline dictated by your most exhausting habits. Let me be brutally transparent about the mechanics of inaction. If you refuse to cross during this precise window of coherence, decoherence will violently claim you regardless. The wave function will collapse, whether you consciously participate in the event or not. However, by abstaining from the choice, your reality will automatically collapse into the default outcome determined by the heavy gravity of your current environment. It will aggressively snap back to the familiar relationships, the worn-out self-image, and the suffocatingly predictable reality you have been desperately trying to outgrow. This does not happen because that default state is morally wrong or evil, but simply because physics heavily favors the path of least energetic resistance. When you withhold your conscious agency, when the gateway unseals and you freeze in fear, the raw cosmic energy that was generated to fuel your crossing instantly bleeds out. It dissipates into the ether, and your personal ecosystem rapidly snaps back to its most stable, baseline configuration, the exact same cage you are already sitting in. Put bluntly, if you do not step across right now, you do not get to pitch a tent and comfortably reside at the threshold. You are violently ejected backward. The aperture slams shut, and if by some sheer miracle it manages to open for you again in the distant future, the energetic toll to cross will be astronomically higher. Why? Because the psychological and energetic loops that paralyzed you this time will have been deeply reinforced by yet another cycle of approaching the edge and retreating. The decoherence will be significantly thicker. Your wave function will be heavily biased toward the mundane, making the friction required to pry that gate open again nearly impossible to overcome. I am not mapping this out to paralyze you with terror. I am providing you with the exact, unvarnished schematics required to execute the maneuver the universe is demanding of you. The portal is not issuing a threat. It is merely presenting you with mathematical facts, and the physics are undeniable. The moment is now. This 60-minute block is your apex. Your coherence time is redlining at its absolute peak. The energetic tax to transcend will never, ever be this remarkably cheap again. Your countdown continues. Having established the unyielding physics of this transition, we must pivot. The quantum mechanics are absolute, and the science is irrefutable. But the visceral, human reality of this phenomenon, the blood, sweat, and psychological terror of standing at this boundary and daring to leap can only be genuinely transmitted through narrative. This is the chronicle of an individual who stood precisely where your feet are planted right now, a person carrying the exact chosen frequency, entirely aware of her burden, terrified out of her mind, who came within a millimeter of turning her back on the portal forever. And it reveals exactly what unfolded when she finally surrendered to the leap. Her name was Mara. For 34 agonizing years, she operated under a crushing paradox. She was simultaneously the most hyper-competent individual in any given room, yet functionally the most invisible. For decades, she agonized over how these two fiercely contradictory realities could coexist. Mara was the ultimate safety net. She was the emergency contact everyone dialed the second their worlds began to fracture. She possessed the uncanny, almost supernatural ability to diagnose the entire architecture of a crisis before the victim had even finished articulating the symptoms. She was the silent anchor grasping the fraying rope when the rest of the team had completely abandoned ship. By every external metric utilized by society, she was a staggering exception to the rule. Yet, according to her own internal compass, she was an absolute phantom. This was not a literal invisibility, of course. People perceived her physical form. They aggressively exploited her reliability, and they claimed to love her. But they only loved her in the shallow, transactional manner people love, a perfectly designed tool, a machine that is perpetually functioning, infinitely capable, and tirelessly carrying the collective weight of others. But the core essence that pulsed beneath her skin, the raw, unnamed frequency that had absolutely nothing to do with being a reliable workhorse or a master problem solver, remained completely unseen. That authentic, simmering core, the profound purpose she was actually incarnated to execute, was completely imperceptible to the masses. Tragically, it was even largely invisible to Mara herself. Because of this suffocating disconnect, she was hunted by a relentless, recurring dream. Night after night, she found herself paralyzed before a doorway. It wasn't an ornate, mythological gate. It was a painfully mundane, ordinary door, identical to millions of others you might pass in countless forgotten hallways. It always stood slightly cracked open, a brilliant, piercing light bleeding violently through the narrow opening. And in every single iteration of this nocturnal vision, Mara would stand frozen at the threshold, deeply intoxicated by the magnetic pull of that blinding illumination. She would slowly extend her trembling hand toward the brass handle, and abruptly, violently, she would be jolted awake. Invariably, the dream aborted a millisecond before her fingers could ever grace the metal of the doorknob. Upon waking, she would aggressively intellectualize the nightmare. She spun elaborate psychological narratives, convincing herself the vision was merely a subconscious manifestation of unchecked ambition, or perhaps a textbook fear of failure, or a fear of success that she ought to politely dissect on a therapist's couch. She constructed a massive fortress of plausible excuses, because hyperanalyzing the dream was infinitely safer than surrendering to the visceral truth. It was violently screaming at her. She was hovering at a dimensional threshold. Then, she reached her 34th year, and her carefully curated reality began to fracture. However, it disintegrated in that highly specific, orchestrated manner that only occurs when a portal is actively tearing its way into your timeline. Her career, a lucrative, high-status position at which she was remarkably exceptional but quietly despised, was abruptly terminated. It wasn't a byproduct of incompetence or failure on her part. The corporation simply restructured, and her role evaporated into the ether. Bracing for a tidal wave of devastation, Mara experienced a wildly different emotion, one that horrified her far more than grief ever could. She felt an overwhelming, intoxicating surge of relief, and the sheer magnitude of that relief instantly triggered absolute terror. For 90 agonizing days, she relentlessly gaslit herself. She aggressively rationalized the relief as a trauma response, convincing her rational mind that it was merely shock. She promised herself that once the numbness wore off, she would seamlessly revert to her old identity, stepping back into rooms to be the indispensable anchor for people whose lives were unspooling. But the relief refused to fade. It deepened and metastasized. Those 3 months of waiting for the panic to subside were essentially Mara standing paralyzed before the unsealed aperture, hand trembling near the handle, completely refusing to engage the latch. Suddenly, she was thrust into an abyss of unstructured chronometry. This wasn't merely free time, as she still had the chaotic administrative tasks of managing a life in transition. Rather, it was a vast, terrifying vacuum of psychological space that was no longer suffocated by the relentless demands of being highly capable, endlessly dependable, and holding everyone else's chaotic threads. It was just raw, unadulterated space. Within that silent void, buried fragments of her true frequency began bubbling to the surface. She began to write. This wasn't a premeditated career pivot or a logical decision. She simply woke up one dawn possessed by a single sentence in her mind that violently demanded to be transcribed. She obeyed. Then came another sentence, then another. When the trance finally broke 3 hours later, she stared at a manuscript she barely comprehended. Yet, for the first time in her adult existence, it felt undeniably, fiercely authentic. The phantom, invisible essence of her soul had briefly materialized onto the physical plane, if only to herself. This miraculous flow state persisted for 42 days. She woke, she wrote, and she channeled a truth she couldn't cognitively map but knew was absolute. Then, inevitably, the ego launched a counteroffensive. One morning, her eyes opened, and instead of channeling, she began to analyze. She meticulously dissected the implications of the prose. She agonized over potential public reception, suffocated herself with imposter syndrome, and debated whether that initial relief of losing her job was a divine compass or a symptom of psychological collapse. By the time her analytical mind finished its violent interrogation, the sun had set, the page remained blank, and the momentum was dead. The very next morning, the paralysis repeated. And the next. The toxic sludge of overthinking completely swallowed the pure act of creation, much like dark water silently closing over a sinking stone. The gateway, once magnificently dilated, was rapidly sealing shut. Desperate, she sought out a confidant, one of the precious few anomalies in her orbit who could genuinely perceive the obscured, invisible frequencies of her nature. During this exchange, her ally delivered a transmission that would permanently alter Mara's cellular makeup. They looked at her and said, "The gateway is not going to patiently hold itself open while you hold court to debate your own worthiness. The portal only remains open while you are actively stepping through it." Mara returned to her sanctuary and immediately began typing. She did not do this because she had magically vanquished her deep-seated insecurities. She hadn't suddenly crowned herself a master wordsmith, nor had she mathematically proven that her career implosion was a cosmic blessing. She wrote because she intuitively knew the portal was hovering on the edge of collapse, and she had perhaps 24 hours before her analytical mind concreted over the entrance forever. She finally took action because the soul-crushing penalty of remaining stagnant suddenly eclipsed the terror of leaping into the unknown. The exorbitant tax of spending 34 years as the most capable yet utterly invisible entity in the room was a ransom she absolutely refused to pay for another second. So, she poured her life force into the work, and the work eventually morphed into something of profound consequence. However, I must shatter the cinematic illusion here. It was not instantaneous. It did not unfold like a mythological fairy tale, where the crossing is immediately met with standing ovations, obvious success, and the comforting external validation that she had made the flawless choice. The reality of the crossing was brutally messy. Just as I warned you earlier, the after is laden with authentic friction. Certain acquaintances looked at her with bewildered pity and simply did not understand. She endured grueling months where her financial reality was a suffocating, terrifying nightmare. There were agonizing nights where she intensely interrogated her own sanity moments, where the seductive comfort of her old, managed gap made this new paradigm feel like a catastrophic error in judgment. Yet, she never retreated. And it wasn't because she was armed with unshakable certainty. She refused to retreat, not because her internal doubts had miraculously evaporated, but because the phase transition was absolute. The laws of physics dictate that once a wave function violently collapses into a definite state, it cannot uncollapse. It cannot be shoved back into the realm of abstract probability. Think back to the thermodynamic metaphor. Once water has flashed into steam, its elemental history is permanently rewritten. Yes, it can theoretically cool down. It can condense, pooling back together and adopting a few superficial characteristics of its former liquid state. However, on a fundamental, molecular level, it retains the indelible memory of having been vaporized. That embedded structural memory alters its destiny forever. Mara did not suddenly mutate into a global icon. She is not a household name, nor is she an influencer whose face you would recognize on a billboard. Her triumph is vastly more profound than mere fame. She is simply a consciousness who dared to breach a dimensional boundary. On the other side of that divide, she evolved into someone executing the hyper-specific labor she was uniquely designed to perform, utilizing a methodology only she could wield, serving the exact demographic, desperately starving for her specific transmission. She is the living embodiment of someone who outright assassinated the managed gap, that agonizing void between her true essence and her public avatar. By halting the exhausting performance, she unearthed a staggering revelation. That very gap was the only barrier standing between her current existence and a timeline vibrating in perfect harmony with her soul. She took the leap because the aperture was unsealed, and she had exactly 1 day left before it cemented shut. You are sitting here absorbing this transmission because your gateway is actively dilated, and you possess exactly 1 hour. Before we proceed, I want to create a brief suspension in our momentum to ask you a direct question. Have you ever physically stood at a threshold you intuitively knew was absolute? A distinct, visceral moment in time where you could feel the tectonic plates of your reality permanently shift? A second where you crossed an invisible point of no return, intimately aware that the phantom of who you were mere moments ago was already dead and buried. If you have survived a moment like this, I want you to document it in the comments below. I am not asking for the polished, cinematic, or grandiose version. Give me the raw, unvarnished truth. Describe the exact microsecond when the entire paradigm inverted. When you stepped through a doorway and the concept of going backward ceased to exist. I want to read exactly how that sheer finality felt in your bones. Now, we must urgently discuss the toll this specific hour is going to extract from you. The entity we call the Gateway does not require you to present a meticulously drafted business plan. It does not demand absolute, unwavering certainty. It does not ask you to proudly present a certificate of your worthiness, nor does it require proof that you are perfectly qualified to handle the immense gravity waiting on the other side. The Gateway demands one currency, and one currency only: your decisive choice. It does not want your preparation. It rejects your endless planning. It scoffs at your obsessive need to feel ready. It demands your absolute, uncompromising decision. This requirement is arguably the most violently counterintuitive aspect of dimensional transitions, and it is the exact psychological trap where the chosen archetype is most frequently paralyzed. They linger in the lobby, waiting for a feeling of absolute readiness to wash over them. They stubbornly refuse to move until the terrifying fog of uncertainty miraculously lifts. They demand that the universe illuminate the path on the other side before they are willing to risk their safety. But the quantum gateway, the literal mechanical engine driving the evolution of human consciousness, flatly refuses to operate under those terms. The aperture does not dilate wider just because you decide to wait. The crossing does not become less hazardous because you choose to hesitate. The architecture of your future timeline will absolutely never become visible while you are cowering on this side of the boundary. The path only materializes beneath your feet after you have taken the step. That is the unyielding law of the universe. That is how the machinery has functioned since the dawn of creation. And it is exactly how it has operated for every single chosen soul who has ever confronted a boundary and dared to cross it. The decision must precede the clarity. The leap must precede the manifestation of the path. The blind commitment must precede the absolute certainty. I know this is terrifying. It is paralyzing, and I refuse to insult your intelligence by pretending it is merely uncomfortable. The mandate to choose before you have proof, to leap into a void where you cannot see the landing zone, to pledge your entire existence before you are granted the roadmap. This violently contradicts every single ingrained survival instinct of a mind that has spent decades carefully micromanaging its environment. It viciously directly assaults the primal logic that screams, "Do not step into the dark. Do not sign a contract without a guarantee. Never wager what you cannot afford to lose." But we must rigorously examine the source of that primal logic. That is the survival wisdom of the liquid state. It is a defensive protocol engineered specifically for a consciousness desperately trying to survive inside a restrictive jar. It is optimized for flowing passively around obstacles, avoiding friction, and contorting itself to match the shape of whatever suffocating container society forces it into. Do not misunderstand me. That liquid wisdom was highly utilitarian. It shielded you from destruction. It allowed you to safely hoard the massive energetic reserves necessary to finally arrive at this exact precipice. But it is fundamentally obsolete now. It is not the operating system of the steam state. The steam state waiting on the other side possesses a radically superior intelligence. The steam state understands that the fragile glass vessel can no longer hold its expanding mass. The steam state recognizes that an obstacle is not a permanent barricade, but merely a porous surface to aggressively penetrate and expand beyond. The steam state realizes that the container, the identity, the job, the relationships that once felt so defining and so utterly necessary, was only ever a temporary holding cell. The steam is not the glass. The steam is the explosive kinetic energy that the glass was momentarily capturing. You are not the container. You are the raw, unbridled energy. And the portal is forcefully demanding that you finally awaken to that fact. So, we are going to do this. We are going to cross. I am about to guide you through a highly specific protocol. Do not mistake this for a passive, relaxing meditation designed to soothe your nerves. This is a deliberate, active threshold crossing. It is a precise, quantum mechanical deployment of your consciousness, engineered to finalize the phase transition that has been aggressively boiling inside of you. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is not a fluffy visualization exercise where you imagine a beautiful meadow. This is a tangible, aggressive act of conscious will that is going to trigger immediate, structural consequences within the very architecture of your physical reality. The activation protocol. Are you prepared? Here is the exact sequence I require you to execute. Settle your physical body into an optimal state of alignment. Whether you choose to sit upright or lie completely flat is irrelevant, so long as you are physically unguarded. If your environment permits, shut your eyes. If you are operating a vehicle or engaged in a task that demands your visual focus, keep your eyes open and simply allow this transmission to permeate your subconscious as a background operating system. Let the architecture of these words work beneath the surface of your active cognition. I need you to execute 3 deliberate respiratory cycles. These do not need to be forced, artificial, or controlled breathwork exercises. Simply observe 3 natural, unbroken loops of respiration. Draw the air in and release it out. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. As the oxygen circulates, force your awareness downward into your physical mass. Viscerally feel the gravity anchoring you. Notice the exact texture of the surface supporting your weight. and register the undeniable, concrete reality of your immediate environment. This grounding step is absolutely critical. You cannot traverse a dimensional threshold while disassociated. The crossing mandates your uncompromising presence within your physical vessel. The gateway is not floating in some mystical, esoteric astral plane. It is fundamentally anchored exactly where you are sitting. It occupies the precise geographic coordinates of the room you are in right now. Now, keeping your eyes shielded from external stimuli, I want you to locate the boundary. Do not try to artificially imagine it. I want you to sense it, because its presence is a heavy, undeniable fact. It is the exact liminal friction you have been enduring for weeks, or perhaps months, however long this energetic buildup has been hunting you. It is that dizzying vertigo of towing an invisible ledge, that haunting sensation of being suspended in the in-between. You are intimately familiar with this vibration. It has been your shadow. I need you to allow that feeling to consume you entirely, right now. Do not attempt to suppress it, manage it, or dilute it into something more palatable. This raw friction is the aperture. You are standing dead center in its frame, honoring the before, without moving forward just yet. Pivot your internal gaze to observe the territory you are leaving behind. Feel the crushing, familiar gravity of the managed gap. Acknowledge the sheer exhaustion of your overly cautious approach to life. Recognize the hyper-competence, the tragic reliability, the endless holding of other people's fraying threads, and that phantom fragment of your soul that remained tragically invisible even to your own mirror. Feel the chronic restlessness that leisure time could never soothe, the bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could ever cure, and the agonizing, perpetual ache of almost arriving. Let the full weight of that reality wash over you. Do not judge it with bitterness or regret. Honor it with deep reverence. This side of the boundary was your reality. It was your incubator. It successfully synthesized the exact version of you required to survive up until this minute. Feel it in its entirety. One final time, sensing the after. Now, keeping your footing on the starting line, project your sensory awareness across the divide. Do not strain your analytical mind trying to conjure a high-definition visual blueprint of the future. You lack the optical capacity to see it clearly from your current coordinates, but you can detect its raw energetic signature. Lock onto the frequency of that new terrain. Sense the sheer relief of existing in a state where the agonizing gap has completely imploded. Feel the alignment of a reality where your outward expression flawlessly matches your internal vibration, where your true contribution is undeniable, where your labor is authentic, and where the friction you encounter is legitimate rather than synthetically managed. Do not obsess over the logistical details of this new life. Strictly lock onto the kinetic energy of it. You are currently suspended dead center between these two massive paradigms. Both realities are actively pressing against your awareness. You are officially in a state of pure superposition. You are hovering in the threshold void, existing inside the ultimate coherence window, mere seconds before the wave function permanently collapses. This is the nexus. You are standing inside the gateway, the collapse. Now, I require your absolute decision. Do not confuse this with a practical to-do list. This is not a decision regarding how you will optimize your schedule tomorrow or what mundane, practical habits you will adopt next week. This must be a sovereign declaration at the foundational, structural level of your consciousness. It is a definitive verdict regarding which version of reality you are actively commanding into existence. The command is simply this: I am crossing, not I wish to cross, not I am contemplating the crossing, not I will cross the moment I feel perfectly secure. I am crossing. You must register this decision somatically, in your flesh and bone, not merely in the shallow theater of your intellect. The human nervous system is brilliant. It instinctively knows the difference between a fleeting, theoretical thought and a blood-bound, irrevocable choice. A genuine decision possesses physical density. When it occurs, You will feel a palpable drop in your body, a distinct settling. It is the quiet, sudden uncoiling of a spring that has been wound too tight for decades. Scan your physical vessel for that release. If you do not feel the tension snap yet, hold your position in the threshold space for a few moments longer. Keep both the old reality and the new reality burning in your awareness. Hold the line until the declaration transforms from a conceptual idea into undeniable physical law. When the decision crystallizes and becomes utterly real, draw in one final, deep breath, and as you release the exhale, let yourself slip across the boundary. Do not expect a cinematic explosion or a chorus of angels. The crossing of a quantum threshold is historically the most silent, violent event in the universe. It is nothing more than a breath, a physical surrender, and a microsecond of absolute deafening stillness during which the wave function shatters and your new dimensional state becomes hard, undeniable reality. Let the outward flow of air be the vehicle of your transit. Let it carry you completely through the aperture. Once the breath is gone, open your eyes. The immediate aftermath. You have arrived on the other side. I know exactly what the cynical, analytical sector of your brain is aggressively whispering right now. I know the exact objection it is preparing to mount. Nothing feels drastically different. I am sitting in the exact same room, looking at the exact same walls. I am still wearing the exact same skin. What supposedly just happened? Allow me to explicitly define what just transpired. You executed a sovereign choice at the core energetic level of your being, completely bypassing the superficial layer of thought. You deliberately collapsed the superposition. You triggered the irreversible tipping point of a phase transition, and the macroscopic, visible effects of that detonation are not going to instantly manifest in the dramatic fashion your ego craves, because that is fundamentally not how thermodynamic phase transitions operate. Revisit our core scientific model. The very microsecond water breaches the boiling point and transmutes into steam. That steam does not instantly look entirely alien. It initially appears as a faint wisp of vapor, a subtle mist, something that the untrained eye might dismiss as just water in a slightly perturbed state. The magnificent, explosive expression of the steam state, its violent expansion, its ability to rise defying gravity, its staggering capacity to power engines and do work that liquid water could never dream of. That sequence unfolds incrementally over time. But make no mistake, the fundamental molecular transition is complete. The verdict is sealed. The wave function has collapsed into reality. What shifts in the immediate aftermath is not the physical furniture of your living room. The external stage props of your existence do not magically rearrange themselves all at once. What fundamentally transforms in this exact moment is your baseline operating system, the core organizing principle and frequency from which you dictate your reality. And because that foundational state has mutated, the external furniture of your material existence will inevitably begin to rearrange itself. This will not happen because you forcefully micromanage your environment, nor because you painstakingly draft a master plan to change your life. It happens because the fabric of reality is highly malleable and hyper-responsive to vibrational frequency. The external world you navigate is never separate from the consciousness that observes it. The moment your internal state permanently shifts, your magnetic resonance recalibrates. When your resonance shifts, the exact nature of what you attract into your orbit alters completely. And when your magnetic pull changes, your entire physical life transforms. Do not mistake this for esoteric magic. This is pure, unadulterated physics. This is the quantum mechanical reality of human consciousness colliding with matter. And the gears of this mechanism have already locked into motion. Let us meticulously map out what you are going to witness in your immediate environment over the coming days and weeks. While your energetic crossing is finished, your physical arrival is a continuous, unfolding process. Understanding the specific symptoms of this new territory is vital. It provides you with the exact navigational precision that your newly phase-transitioned consciousness is now equipped to handle. Here are the 6 distinct phenomena you are about to encounter. 1. a suspicious, unsettling lightness. First, you will detect a profound sense of lightness that may actually trigger your alarm systems. The crushing density you have been lugging around for decades, the exhausting weight of the managed gap, the burden of extreme caution, and that chronic, agonizing ache of never fully arriving is going to evaporate. This lift will not be instantaneous, but it will happen in undeniable, measurable increments. This newfound buoyancy might feel incredibly suspicious to your nervous system. You have worn that heavy psychological armor for so long that your ego has mistaken it for your actual skeleton. Shedding it might temporarily masquerade as a profound loss, tricking your mind into believing you have carelessly dropped something vital. Let me be clear. You are missing absolutely nothing. You are simply experiencing the absence of a crippling tax you no longer have to pay. 2. Sudden, violent flashes of clarity. Second, you will be struck by spontaneous, jarring waves of absolute lucidity. This will not manifest as a constant, unbroken state of enlightened bliss, but rather as sudden lightning-strike epiphanies. You will experience abrupt downloads of understanding regarding your current trajectory, your environment, or your life's work insights that were previously entirely cloaked from your vision. These brilliant flashes are simply your new vibrational state asserting itself. They are the pure, uncorrupted signal cutting clearly through the void, now that the suffocating interference pattern has been obliterated. When they strike, do not suffocate them with immediate, neurotic overanalysis. Let them breathe. Document them if they contain specific directives, and allow the larger mosaic to assemble itself naturally over time. 3. The re-engineering of your ecosystem. Third, the architecture of your interpersonal connections will quietly but aggressively recalibrate. Certain bonds will deepen with a velocity that shocks you. Individuals who previously hovered in your periphery at a safe distance will abruptly feel profoundly anchored, resonant, and authentic. These are the allies who have always resided on this side of the portal. They can finally recognize you because you have joined them. Conversely, a natural, silent chasm will open between you and others. This separation will not be fueled by toxic conflict, dramatic arguments, or harsh rejection. It is merely the objective physics of dissonant resonance playing out. This is not a tragic loss. This is the universe actively re-engineering your ecosystem to support your new bandwidth. Surrender to the physics. 4. A kinetic, unrelenting urgency. Fourth, a radically different strain of urgency will infiltrate your system. The old panic you experienced on the other side of the gate was driven by a ticking clock, the anxiety of a closing coherence window, the terror of limited time, and the fear of missing the leap. The urgency you will feel now is purely kinetic. It is the unyielding drive to execute your mission. It is the undeniable awareness that you harbor a massive contribution, seamlessly merging with the energetic capacity to actually deliver it. This sensation is completely devoid of anxiety. It is pure, concentrated power. It is the newly formed steam state aggressively demanding to be channeled into the specific labor only you can perform. 5. The death of waiting to be ready. Fifth, your entire relationship with the concept of readiness will be permanently dismantled. In your previous paradigm, feeling ready was a mandatory prerequisite, a mythical finish line you had to cross before permitting yourself to take a single step. In this new dimension, readiness is redefined as an active, ongoing process. It is something forged during the execution, never before it. You will find yourself lunging into massive endeavors long before your logical mind feels comfortably prepared, only to discover mid-air that the capacity was there all along. Action now precedes confidence. That is the ultimate superpower granted by the phase transition. 6. Undeniable legibility and recognition. Sixth, you will experience genuine recognition from the external world. People will suddenly begin to perceive the phantom parts of your identity that were previously shrouded in invisibility. This will not happen because you are suddenly screaming for attention, aggressively demanding to be seen, or forcing society to look at you. It occurs simply because your energetic transmission is no longer diluted. The gap has imploded, because you have ceased managing the exhausting distance between your truth and your facade. Society is finally receiving your raw, unencrypted signal, and a pure, unfiltered signal commands an undeniable recognition that a carefully managed persona could never dream of achieving. This is the exact terrain you have just breached. This is the expansive reality you have violently crossed into. Now, we must confront the staggering weight of responsibility that accompanies this initiation, because the demanding archetype of the chosen one absolutely does not retire at the threshold. The gateway was never the final destination. The dimensional threshold you have just breached is merely the starting line. Crossing over initiates an entirely new paradigm of obligation, fundamentally distinct from the burdens you previously shouldered on the other side. Up until this exact second, your primary duty was strictly internal. Your mandate was self-evolution, meticulous preparation, and the painstaking stockpiling of the energetic bandwidth required to even approach this portal. This inward focus was absolutely not an act of selfishness. It was a structural necessity. You cannot traverse a dimensional rift you are entirely unequipped for, nor can you pour into the world from an empty vessel. The agonizing isolation, the relentless testing, the hypersensitivity, and the exhausting caution that was all legitimate, mandatory labor. It was the grueling forge required to construct a vessel capable of wielding what comes next, the expansion of responsibility. Now that you have arrived in this new territory, the scope of your duty exponentially expands. This massive shift will not crash down upon you all at once, but you must understand that the profound phase transition you just triggered was never exclusively about your personal enlightenment. The archetype of the chosen is fundamentally not a narrative of selfish ascension. Rather, it is a mechanism of individual elevation designed explicitly for collective impact. The exact vibrational frequency you emanate, the unique resonance of your awakened consciousness, and the hyper-specific medicine you are designed to administer, these are desperately required resources. They are not meant for the masses, but for the exact demographic whose frequency is starving for your unique signal, and for the specific pocket of reality that only your transmission can permanently alter. This new mandate represents the gravity that will replace the toxic burden you just abandoned. Make no mistake, it carries weight, but this new weight is inherently lighter because it is rooted in undeniable authenticity rather than an exhausting performance. It is a legitimate mandate. It belongs exclusively to you, and it is the sole mathematical reason the aperture dilated for you instead of the person standing next to you. The chosen are never selected for their own ego gratification. They are drafted into service because the universe requires their exact energetic signature to plug a hole in the collective consciousness, and the world demands this medicine immediately, not half a year from now when your ego finally feels perfectly ready. Not after you have painstakingly resolved every lingering speck of imposter syndrome. The mandate is active right now, utilizing the exact frequency you are currently radiating. This is the profound responsibility of the new paradigm. I need you to feel the full weight of it not as a crushing pressure, but as absolute, undeniable meaning. That haunting, nameless calling that has been aggressively pulling at you from beneath the floorboards of your ordinary life is entirely real. It is a structural necessity for the world, and you are now firmly anchored in the state from which it can finally be executed. That is exactly what the gateway was designed for, dismantling the imposter syndrome. At this juncture, I must speak directly to a specific shadow that I know is lurking in the back of your mind as you absorb this transmission. I am acutely aware of the skeptic whispering in your ear. It is that defensive mechanism analyzing my words, feeling a profound resonance, yet simultaneously running a parallel script of deep denial. It is the voice that screams, "This is absurdly grandiose. Who am I to claim the title of a chosen one? Who am I to be navigating quantum gateways? Who am I to possess a cosmic purpose that humanity supposedly needs?" I want to rip the mask off this insecurity right now, because this specific strain of doubt is absolutely not the enemy of your evolution. In fact, it is one of the most mathematically reliable indicators that you actually carry the chosen frequency. The toxic grandiosity that your doubt is desperately trying to shield you from the narcissistic delusion of self-importance, the belief that you are a divine messiah, exempt from the grueling laws of human existence, that is absolutely not the frequency we are discussing here. Harboring the chosen pattern has absolutely zero correlation with moral superiority. It does not grant you a VIP pass to bypass ordinary reality, nor is it some fairy tale destiny orchestrated by a benevolent universe to pamper you. It is nothing more than a mechanical fact. Your specific internal frequency flawlessly matches an external structural necessity. That is the entire equation. Every visionary who has ever violently shifted the trajectory of this planet, every creator who manifested something immortal, every soul who delivered a transmission that broke someone out of their cage, every single one of them stood paralyzed at this exact same threshold. Every last one of them was crippled by this identical doubt. None of them were absolutely certain they were the right candidate, but they threw themselves across the boundary anyway because the spiritual agony of remaining stagnant violently outweighed the terror of the leap, the transmutation of doubt. You are not a unique exception just because you feel terrified. You are, however, highly specific because your exact transmission is required on the grid right now. And that healthy, grounding doubt, the very mechanism that anchors you, prevents you from drowning in ego, and keeps your compass true that doubt crosses the threshold with you. It does not magically vaporize in this new dimension. Instead, its core function is permanently re-engineered. On the old side of the gate, your doubt acted as a barricade, aggressively manufacturing excuses to prevent you from taking the leap. On the new side of the gate, that same doubt transforms into an elite quality control system. It becomes the internal auditor that keeps you fiercely authentic, constantly verifying whether your output is the raw, unadulterated truth or just a cheap performance of it. You desperately need this doubt. Keep it securely in your pocket. Just permanently revoke its authority to dictate your forward momentum. The aperture has been breached. You are officially in the new paradigm. Let us press forward. The peril of re-entry turbulence. We must urgently address the psychological whiplash that occurs when a chosen individual breaches the threshold and immediately attempts to scramble backward. This reactionary recoil is arguably the most agonizing and universally experienced dynamic of the entire phase transition protocol, and you must understand its architecture immediately. If you are blind to this phenomenon, it will destroy you when it inevitably strikes, because it will strike. In the immediate wake of a dimensional crossing, there is almost always a brutal adjustment period, sometimes lasting days, sometimes agonizing weeks where the gravitational drag of your former reality becomes overwhelmingly seductive. This does not happen because your decision to cross was fundamentally flawed. It does not mean you made a catastrophic error in judgment. This violent regression occurs because your previous state carved deep neurological trenches and massive energetic grooves into the bedrock of your consciousness. Those established pathways do not simply vaporize the second you step through the portal. Over time, as your nervous system acclimates to the new baseline frequency, those old grooves will eventually erode and smooth over. But in the raw, immediate aftermath of your leap, those old circuits are still fully wired, highly active, and desperately trying to pull power. The intoxicating pull of the familiar, the desperate urge to slip back into the comfortable numbness of your old life is a very tangible, physical force. In quantum mechanics, we refer to this highly volatile period as re-entry turbulence. Imagine the physics of our earlier metaphor. Re-entry turbulence is the newly formed, blazing hot steam violently colliding with the freezing atmosphere on the other side of the boundary, causing it to rapidly, terrifyingly condense. It is the shock wave of a phase-transitioned consciousness slamming headfirst into a dense physical reality that has not yet updated its software to match your new frequency. It is the raw friction of an elevated mind grinding against an outdated environment. During this turbulent phase, you will be violently assaulted by doubt. You will feel a terrifying magnetic pull to retreat to the safety of the managed gap, to revert to being overly careful, to politely shrink your aura, and to comfortably rebuild the wall between who you truly are and what you allow society to see. The universe will likely test you by throwing people or chaotic circumstances into your path that seem perfectly designed to confirm your worst fears, that your crossing was arrogant, that you acted prematurely, that you were utterly unqualified, and that the terrain on this new side is far more brutal than you calculated. The true nature of the friction. I need you to burn this specific truth into your consciousness. Re-entry turbulence is absolutely not an indictment of your decision. It is not evidence of a mistake. On the contrary, it is absolute, undeniable proof that the crossing was genuine. If your transition had merely been a cute intellectual exercise, if it had just been a pleasant daydream or a superficial visualization of change, there would be absolutely zero friction. Your reality would remain perfectly undisturbed. The turbulence you are experiencing is the literal friction of your newly elevated state, aggressively asserting dominance over a stagnant environment. When steam violently collides with a cold surface, it isn't failing and permanently reverting to a puddle of useless water. It is simply executing the exact thermodynamic function that steam is designed to perform. It is transferring raw heat. It is actively mutating the environment, violently applying the explosive energy of the phase transition to the rigid reality it has encountered. Do not abandon the steam state. When the re-entry turbulence threatens to shake you apart, do not interpret the shaking as a cosmic warning to retreat. Reframe it instantly. The violent shaking is the definitive proof that the crossing was successful and your true labor has finally commenced. The impossibility of uncollapsing. Furthermore, you must accept an irreversible law of physics. You cannot fully go back. This is arguably the most vital piece of intel I can equip you with regarding the aftermath of a threshold breach. Once a quantum wave function collapses, it is mathematically impossible to uncollapse it. Once a phase transition finalizes, the structural mutation is permanent. Yes, as I mentioned, you can temporarily cool down. You can panic, condense, and mimic the superficial behaviors of your old liquid state. You can shrink yourself to fit back into the jar, but your foundational molecular structure forever retains the embedded memory of having been vaporized into steam. And that embedded, cellular memory fundamentally alters your destiny. Even if you succumb to the terror, even if the re-entry turbulence forces you into a period of severe psychological contraction and you seemingly return to your old life, you are no longer the naive consciousness that stood on the starting line an hour ago. You are now an awakened, phase-transitioned consciousness that is merely playing dress-up in a condensed, restricted state. The frequency of the crossing is permanently grafted into your DNA, the sequential nature of gateways. And because that frequency is now active within you, the next gateway, the next inevitable phase transition in your timeline will materialize exponentially faster than it would have if you had cowardly refused this one. This brings us to the ultimate architecture of threshold crossings. They are never singular, isolated events. Gateways are the sequential, mechanical gears of conscious evolution. Every single threshold you successfully navigate aggressively lowers the required activation energy for the subsequent leap. The pattern of the chosen is not about locating one mythical, final door and resting forever. It is an infinite corridor of gateways. Each portal opens onto a more demanding threshold. Each one demands the exact same terrifying currency. The absolute resolve to decide before you are certain, to blindly commit before you possess the roadmap, and to leap into the void before the landing zone is visible. You have successfully breached this specific gateway today. Eventually, once you have fully metabolized this crossing, once the turbulence subsides and this elevated frequency becomes your mundane baseline, you will suddenly detect the signature of the next aperture. It will crack open, and the 60-minute countdown will begin anew. This is not a punishment. It is the design. This is the relentless, magnificent trajectory of the chosen one operating on the other side of the veil. The quantum coherence of the chosen. Before we conclude, we must pivot to a phenomenon that exists in the shadowy, liminal space between hard quantum physics and subjective human experience. It is a highly tangible reality that defies both strict scientific taxonomy and simple narrative storytelling. I refer to this phenomenon as the field of the chosen. Within the architecture of reality, there exists a profound, measurable quantum coherence that spontaneously generates between individual consciousnesses that have survived similar phase transitions. There is an invisible, yet unbreakable frequency locking together the individuals who have successfully navigated these identical thresholds, the chosen ones who are currently operating on similar elevated bandwidths across the globe. I am not utilizing the term coherence as a poetic metaphor. I am describing a literal, verifiable manifestation of quantum entanglement, violently scaled up to the macroscopic level of human consciousness. The phenomenon of conscious entanglement, in the strictest definitions of quantum physics, entanglement refers to the staggering phenomenon where two distinct systems having previously interacted or currently sharing identical foundational states maintain an unbreakable, non-local correlation. It is a terrifyingly beautiful responsiveness to one another that operates completely independent of geographic proximity, bypassing the need for physical contact or direct, linear communication. At this exact microsecond, you are actively merging into this entangled field. You are not entering it because you successfully filed an application, paid a membership fee, or recited an oath to join an exclusive esoteric club. You have merged into the field simply by virtue of surviving the transition. The phase mutation is locked in, and as a result, your newly calibrated internal frequency is now an exact, mathematical match to the overarching frequency of this collective grid. The immediate practical application of this physics is staggering. You are permanently severed from your isolation, that crushing loneliness that has defined your entire chosen one narrative up until this hour, that agonizing sensation of desperately trying to broadcast in a dead language, of being tuned to a high-definition frequency that the surrounding population was biologically incapable of receiving. That profound isolation was absolutely not a permanent life sentence. That isolation is strictly a symptom suffered by the chosen who are still paralyzed in the lobby, refusing to cross the threshold. However, on this side of the aperture, the entangled field is an absolute, undeniable reality. The quantum coherence is mathematically sound. The non-local, invisible circuitry connecting your consciousness to thousands of other minds who have survived identical, brutal phase transitions is entirely real. You will not locate these allies by frantically searching for them, passing out business cards, or forcing networking connections. You will magnetize them purely through resonance, by simply operating at your raw, unadulterated baseline frequency rather than the suffocated, heavily redacted, managed version you use to project the field, will instinctively react. The moment you unapologetically embody exactly who you are on this side of the boundary, the overarching quantum coherence activates like a tripwire. The connections will materialize out of the ether. Do not misunderstand this mechanism. I am not promising you a mundane community in the traditional, sociological sense. This is not about finding a cozy group of individuals who share your exact political beliefs, your dietary habits, or your superficial hobbies. This phenomenon is radically more foundational. It is the raw, quantum coherence of awakened consciousness. It is the immediate, non-local synchronization of biological systems that have successfully navigated the exact same thermodynamic phase transition. It is entirely real. It is actively scanning for your signal right now, and it will exponentially amplify the impact of the labor you are about to unleash upon the world. Any work you produce on this side of the divide will eclipse the meager output you managed on the old side, precisely because you are now operating in deep coherence with a vast, invisible battery, a field that actively sustains, defends, and broadcasts the exact frequency you are radiating. You are not alone. And the brutal truth is, you never actually were. You were only experiencing the illusion of isolation because the specific, condensed state you previously inhabited was naturally quarantined by its own incompatible frequency. But the expanded state you have just occupied, that state is fiercely connected. That state is hardwired directly into the matrix. This field is staggeringly vast, profoundly real, and currently surging with the energy of countless other consciousnesses that have crossed, are actively crossing right now, or are rapidly approaching the exact same dimensional coordinates you just reached. Welcome to the entanglement, reaching back across the void. Before we begin the final descent and bring this specific broadcast to a close, I have a vital directive for you. I want you to scan your immediate environment. Is there someone in your life, a friend, a colleague, a loved one who is currently hovering at the exact terrifying precipice you just leaped from? Someone you can viscerally sense is suffocating in the in-between. Someone crippled by the restlessness of the almost, but not quite yet? If you can identify that person, I want you to drop a single word or symbol for them in the comments section below. You do not need to expose their identity or explicitly name them. This is not about public callouts. It is simply about the energetic act of acknowledgement. That micro-action, the deliberate recognition of someone trapped in the void, is a literal activation of the quantum field. It is the profound mechanics of one crossed consciousness, extending a lifeline backward through the gateway, reaching out to stabilize a soul still paralyzed by the terror of the leap. The final descent. I am initiating the closing sequence of this transmission. I do this not because your grand journey is somehow concluding. In truth, the actual expedition has only just launched, but because the specific mechanical function of this broadcast has been successfully executed. The heavy lifting that remains is entirely yours to shoulder, and you are now flawlessly equipped to carry it. You breached a genuine dimensional threshold today. You survived a literal, quantum mechanical phase transition that violently restructured the architecture of your consciousness, permanently altered your vibrational frequency, forcefully collapsed your superposition, and firmly anchored your existence within an entirely new paradigm of reality. This was not a fleeting psychological trick. You did not merely hypnotize yourself into a temporary burst of motivation. This event happened. It occurred in the most precise, objective, physical, and quantum mechanical definition of the word. And now, you stand firmly on the other side, the obsolete iteration of yourself that was frozen at the gateway, the version that was perpetually exhausted from managing the suffocating gap between their massive potential and their microscopic expression, the one plagued by an exhaustion that rest could not touch, the one who could desperately feel the heat of the portal, but lacked the audacity to step through that version, is dead. It is officially a memory. Yes, it is a profoundly honored memory, a respected monument to the resilient warrior who carried you through the dark and delivered you to the starting line, but it is strictly a relic of the past. It holds absolutely zero authority in your present reality. Your present reality is this. You are the vapor. You are the steam state. You are the successfully phase-transitioned consciousness. You are the chosen who actually had the courage to leap, and the real labor begins this exact second. That hyper-specific mission, the exact task that only your unique neurological wiring is capable of executing, the singular mathematical reason, the gateway dilated specifically for you that work is no longer a crushing burden. It has become your default frequency. It is fundamentally what you are. And because you have violently dismantled the gap between your authentic self and your projected self, the work will simply begin to flow. It will not arrive all at once, in a neat, stress-free package. It will absolutely be accompanied by severe friction. It will demand the terrifying risk of violently colliding with real-world obstacles. But it will manifest. It has to. You are now anchored in the only state from which it can possibly originate. You are locked onto the exact frequency required to broadcast it. The threshold has been destroyed. The new reality is concrete, and the infinite wave function has collapsed exactly into the precise, uncompromising, and magnificent version of you that was patiently waiting on the other side all along. Now, I have one final set of instructions for you to execute within the next 24 hours. Do not attempt a grandiose stunt. Do not take to social media to make a dramatic, ego-driven announcement regarding your spiritual awakening. Here is the completely rewritten version of the 14th and final part. I have maximized the impact of the closing message, expanded on your core concepts, and completely overhauled the sentence structure and vocabulary to ensure it is entirely unique and significantly longer than the original. Instead, I require you to execute something microscopic in scale, yet violently authentic in its reality. I want you to perform one singular task, just one that you have been actively dodging because you were too exhausted by the daily grind of managing the gap. Choose a single, definitive action that the expansive, steam iteration of your consciousness would effortlessly execute, but that the timid, liquid version of you desperately avoided. This act does not need to be a colossal spectacle. It does not require a public audience, external validation, or grand visibility. But it must be unfiltered, undeniable truth. It must be the raw, actualized thing, completely stripped of any managed or diluted filters. Write the exact opening sentence of that manuscript you've been too terrified to begin. Dial the number and initiate the conversation you have been expertly sidestepping. Take the very first physical step toward manifesting the exact frequency you are now generating. You have exactly 24 hours to lock this in. You must strike before the inevitable re-entry turbulence has the opportunity to construct a rationalized, logical excuse for your paralysis. This micro-action is the absolute physical confirmation of your dimensional leap. It is the maiden voyage of your phase-transitioned self. It is the literal, mathematical collapse of the quantum wave function actively bleeding into the three-dimensional architecture of your daily life. It may seem insignificant to an outside observer, but energetically, it is everything. Execute it, and as you take this step, let this absolute certainty anchor your bones. The aperture that unsealed for you today was not a glitch in the matrix. It was not a random algorithmic suggestion, a mathematical anomaly, or a lucky coincidence of digital timing. The portal manifested strictly because you were unequivocally prepared. It opened because your coherence window achieved absolute synchronization. The crushing weight of your entire history, every brutal lesson, every heartbreak, every expansion, and every agony finally breached the critical thermodynamic threshold. The wave function of your spirit hit its apex of flexibility, and the environmental variables locked into perfect alignment to trigger the collapse into this elevated paradigm. You have been selected, not by a guru, an institution, or a subjective deity passing moral judgment upon your soul. You were drafted by the cold, uncompromising laws of reality itself. You were chosen by the flawless physics of conscious evolution, by the precise, impersonal, yet breathtakingly reliable mechanics that dictate how human awareness upgrades. That evolution does not happen through slow, agonizing increments. It happens through violent, immediate phase transitions that permanently rewrite the code of your existence. You bear the chosen frequency. You have breached the barrier. You are firmly planted on the new shore, and biological retreat is mathematically impossible. The gateway has been crossed, and you are through. I cannot prophesy the exact logistical details of what happens tomorrow, because your trajectory is now uniquely tethered to your distinct resonant signature. The unfolding of this steam state is hyper-specific to the exact contribution you are designed to inject into the collective grid. What awaits you now is pure expansion. It is the ascent. It is the manifestation of the exact reality that perfectly harmonizes with your untethered frequency, permanently replacing the hollow life where you merely manage the gap between your soul and society. The blueprint of your future is entirely yours to draw now. But I can guarantee this: it is absolute reality. It is fully accessible. It has been patiently hovering on this side of the divide for the exact amount of time it took you to finally summon the courage to leap. Your era of waiting has officially expired. The genuine labor commences now. In the approaching days, when you find yourself slipping into pockets of profound stillness during a quiet morning, or in those liminal spaces where the frantic noise of the mundane world briefly mutes itself, allow the resonance of this transmission to sit beside you. Return to these coordinates at the threshold whenever you need to remember the physics of your crossing. And if you recognize a soul in your orbit, who is currently trembling at the edge of their own abyss. Deploy this broadcast to them. Do not frame it as a casual recommendation. Offer it as a structural bridge. The act of transmitting this frequency is, in itself, a profound quantum event. You are not merely forwarding a video. You are actively extending the coherence of the entangled field to catch someone who is desperate, yet almost ready to leap. The bridge you construct to save another is the exact same energetic architecture that sustains your own elevation. One specific, cautious iteration of your consciousness clicked play on this transmission. A radically upgraded, phase-transitioned entity is now closing it. The gateway is officially behind you. Welcome to the other side.